The wind swept across the deserted plain, carrying with it the soft hum of a broken world. Somewhere beyond the crumbling highways and skeletal trees stood an abandoned train station, half buried in vines, silent as the grave. This was the edge of the Whisper Zone, a place where even birds no longer sang. Inside its forgotten walls, 50 souls clung to life, hiding from the creatures that hunted sound. Ellis crouched by the shattered window, peering into the gray morning. His eyes scanned the far horizon, alert for movement, not from the living, but from what they called the echoed. They were fast, but only if they heard you. In this world, noise was death. One cough, one misplaced footstep, one creaking door, and they would come. Behind him, the station's interior was hushed. No one spoke. Communication had evolved into glances, hand signals, and breathless whispers in dire need. The silence wasn't just a precaution, it was their lifeline. They'd learned the hard way. Ellis's younger sister, Mira, approached quietly, her steps practiced and soft. She handed him a folded note. Paper had become their language. He read it in a flash. 3 more days until the recon team returns. Food stores low. Spirits lower. We need a plan. He nodded once, then signed wait and hope with his fingers. Mira gave a faint smile and retreated. She had grown up fast in this world, too fast. She was only 16, yet carried herself like someone who'd seen entire cities fall. Because she had. Ellis turned back to the window. A flicker in the distance. Movement? He narrowed his eyes. A deer. Alone. Safe. For now. The echoed hadn't been born from a virus, not exactly. No one knew the true cause, only that when the outbreak began, it wasn't bites or blood that changed people. It was something in the sound. The first wave swept through cities with sirens blaring and people screaming. Those who survived learned to mute their lives. Phones were smashed. Radios destroyed. Even shoes were padded with cloth to muffle steps. Inside the station's central chamber, a fire flickered in a metal barrel. Its light cast long shadows across tired faces. Old maps covered the walls, marked with routes, symbols, and warnings, all silent testaments to lives lived quietly. Among the group, Marlowe, the oldest, perhaps late 60s, stirred a pot of vegetable stew. They hadn't had meat in weeks, but no one complained. Survival had narrowed their focus. A faint thud. The silence broke. Everyone froze. It came again, a soft, deliberate knock from beneath the floorboards. Mira rushed to Ellis's side, her eyes wide. The tunnel, she mouthed. The underground supply route. The recon team. Maybe. Ellis crept across the room and lifted the loose board. A hand reached up, fingers trembling. He grabbed it and pulled. A familiar face emerged, Juno, leader of the scouts. Her face was pale, smeared with dirt, but alive. She held up a note with shaky hands. We found the quiet city. Real. Defensible. But we weren't alone. Gasps rippled silently. Ellis signed, how many lost? Juno shook her head slowly. 2. And something followed. The room shifted. The air thickened. Something followed wasn't a phrase anyone wanted to read. Marlowe stepped forward and scribbled. We can't stay here. But where could they go? Ellis helped Juno to a bench as others crowded around her. She took a long breath, then wrote more. The quiet city is northeast. Walled. Empty. No echoed inside. But there's one problem. The bridge is gone. The bridge. The only pass over Black Hollow Ravine. If it was out, they'd need an alternate path, likely through echoed-infested forest. Still, it was hope. And in this world, hope was rare. Suddenly, from outside, a screech. Not a scream. Not a roar. A scraping, high-pitched, guttural rasp that curdled blood. Every head turned toward the boarded windows. The echoed were near. Had they followed Juno? Ellis motioned urgently. Lights off. Fire out. Silent positions. The station transformed into a ghostly tomb. Everyone melted into shadows, breath held, eyes wide. Outside, the screech grew louder. It wasn't alone. The echoed hunted by sound, not sight. As long as the survivors remained still and quiet, they had a chance. A glass bottle, loosened by Juno's entrance, teetered on a shelf. Ellis saw it. He dove. Caught it in his hands. It didn't fall. Silence saved them once more. Outside, the echoed paused, snorted, and moved on. Minutes passed like hours. Then, nothing. Gone. Ellis exhaled slowly, then glanced around. 50 faces stared back, unified by one truth: they couldn't stay. Tomorrow, they would begin planning the journey to the quiet city. But tonight, they survived. Dawn arrived not with light, but with a faint grayness that crept through the station's dusty windows. The fire had long since been put out. 50 survivors gathered in silence, their eyes drawn to the faded map spread across the cracked table. It showed every known path, ruin, and echo zone within 50 miles, and now, all attention pointed northeast. Toward the place Juno had called the quiet city. Ellis traced the route with his finger, calculating risks. The main road was gone, the bridge at Black Hollow destroyed. That meant navigating the ridge trail, a treacherous path clinging to a steep ravine. Normally, it would be suicidal. But these weren't normal times. Mira stood beside him, arms crossed. She didn't need to speak, her eyes said everything: we have no choice. Juno, her energy drained but her resolve unbroken, leaned on a walking stick and pointed to a small red circle on the map. Here. Echo nests. We must move before dusk. They feed after dark. The others nodded silently. They had seen what happened when the echoed fed. The creatures weren't undead in the traditional sense. Their bodies were twisted, their skin faded like dust, their eyes vacant. But it was their reaction to sound, that horrifying, instant shift from stillness to fury, that made them the most dangerous predators in this new world. Ellis moved to the center of the group and raised a hand, fingers spread, a signal for unity. Then he signed. We move in groups of 5. Silence at all costs. Pack light. Everyone leaves today. The station came alive with quiet motion. Packs were filled with dry food, water flasks, and tools. Noise-canceling foam was wrapped around boots. Metal pieces were bound with cloth. Even the children, few as they were, had learned how to move without a sound. Mira helped a young boy, Aaron, secure his scarf. He was no older than 8, yet hadn't spoken aloud in over a year. His mother had been lost during a supply run. Since then, he'd clung to Mira like a shadow. By noon, the first group set out: Ellis, Mira, Juno, and 2 others. They moved like ghosts through the countryside, avoiding debris, broken cars, and shattered glass. Nature had reclaimed much of the land. Vines wrapped around storefronts. Trees grew through roads. But here and there, signs of the old world remained: a rusted bicycle, a silent traffic light, a half-faded billboard with smiling faces no longer relevant. Half a mile in, they reached a narrow tunnel beneath the freeway. Ellis signaled for caution. Echoes were known to nest in dark, confined places. Juno stepped forward, pulling out a small mirror. She used it to check the tunnel's curve without exposing herself. Then she nodded. Clear. They passed through one by one, breaths held, weapons gripped tightly. No one spoke. Not even a whisper. Then, a sound. Not loud, but distinct. A twig snapping, to their left. Everyone froze. Ellis crouched low, scanning the tree line. Mira reached for Aaron and shielded him behind her. From the shadows, something stirred, not fast, not aggressive. Just movement. A figure stepped out. Human. She raised both hands, palms up, empty. Her face was gaunt, sunburned, but unmistakably alive. Juno recognized her instantly. She ran forward and embraced the woman in silence. It was Reese, another scout from the original recon team, one they'd assumed lost. Reese passed Juno a scrap of cloth with hurriedly written notes. They followed us when we escaped the quiet city. They don't make noise. They just watch. One of them stood outside our shelter for hours. No breathing. No sound. Just waiting. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Mira wrote on her pad and held it up. What are they? Reese hesitated, then wrote, not echoed. Worse. Smarter. That sent a chill through the group. The echoed were brutal but predictable. If something out there was hunting in silence, not reacting to sound, but observing it, then the rules they'd lived by might no longer apply. Still, they couldn't turn back. The rest of the survivors were still on the move. The quiet city was their only hope. Ellis waved the group forward, faster now, urgency in every step. By sunset, they reached the way station, an old ranger tower overlooking the ridgeline. It was empty. Dusty. But safe for the night. The rest of the groups would follow their markers, arriving in waves. By morning, they'd all be here. But as the first stars appeared overhead and the forest turned black, Mira noticed something. A figure, standing in the tree line. Far. Still. Watching. She tapped Ellis. He turned slowly. It didn't move. Didn't approach. Just stood there, like a statue in the dark. Ellis stared back, heart thudding. Then the figure turned and vanished into the trees, without a sound. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, 30 of the 50 survivors had arrived at the ranger tower. The rest were still hours away, their movements slow and deliberate through the forest trails. Inside the cabin, every creak of the wood was muffled, every step carefully placed. The group spoke only through scribbled notes and hand signs. Tension hung in the air like smoke. Ellis stood by the window again, watching the forest beyond the clearing. Nothing moved. But he knew what he'd seen the night before, that figure. It hadn't acted like the echoed. No screech. No wild charge. Just watching. Juno emerged from the back room, her face tight with concern. She handed Ellis a folded message from the final recon scout, Reese, one she'd written during the night. The Watchers don't hunt sound. They mimic silence. They stand where we can see them. I think they're testing us. Learning. Ellis's jaw tightened. For a year, the survivors had believed silence was their only weapon. If that was changing, everything was at risk. Mira, always alert, paced the upstairs loft. She was the youngest in the command group, but her instincts were sharp. She'd seen the world fall before she could finish high school, yet she carried herself like a soldier. Her eyes caught movement near the edge of the trees. A shape, no, two. She dropped to her knees and tapped twice on the wooden floor, their code 4, eyes on. Ellis joined her instantly. He followed her pointed finger and saw them. Two figures. Standing side by side, still as stones, far enough to blend with the trees, but unmistakably watching. He raised his binoculars slowly. The lens brought the figures into focus. Neither moved. No shifting. No blinking. Their skin looked pale, almost gray. But it was their posture that was most disturbing, not slack like the echoed, not mindless. These figures were upright, calm, as if curious. Mira passed him a note. Should we test them? Ellis hesitated. Then he tore off a small scrap of paper, wadded it into a tight ball, and tossed it gently out the window. It landed silently in the grass below. Nothing happened. He picked up a pebble and dropped it a few inches to the floor. Still, nothing. Then Mira made a mistake. She leaned on the railing too hard. It creaked. It was faint, barely more than a whisper. But both figures turned their heads. Slowly. In perfect sync. Toward the cabin. Ellis and Mira backed away at once, breath caught in their throats. Downstairs, Juno was already organizing the next steps. She scrawled out a message and held it up for the group. We leave tonight. All of us. We reached the edge of the quiet city by dawn. No one disagreed. Whatever the Watchers were, they couldn't be studied or fought here. They had to move before the forest closed around them. By evening, the last group arrived. All had made it, but their faces told stories of narrow escapes. 2 of them had seen the same silent figures standing on hillsides. Not approaching. Just watching. Inside the ranger tower, plans were drawn. They would split into 4 columns and move along staggered forest paths. Juno would take the lead with Ellis. Mira would guide the young and older survivors through the central route. They would meet at the old signal tower near the quiet city wall. A crumbling structure, but visible from far away. It would serve as their final rally point before entering the city. As darkness fell, they moved. Step by step. Shadows gliding through deeper shadows. The forest was colder than expected, branches swaying gently overhead. Leaves rustled, but not from the wind, something else moved. Stealthy. Measured. Reese, walking behind Ellis, tapped his shoulder and pointed into the woods. Another watcher. This one was closer. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It knew they were there. Juno turned to Ellis and mouthed 2 words. They learn. They kept walking. Just before midnight, Ellis's group reached the signal tower, a jagged silhouette rising above the trees. Vines wrapped around its steel frame, and the ladder had mostly rusted away. Still, it stood, visible through the darkness like a skeletal guardian. The other groups began to arrive, one by one. 48. 49. Finally, the 50th. No one had been lost. It felt like a miracle. But the moment was short-lived. From every direction, they began to appear, watchers. One by one. Surrounding the clearing, never stepping into the light. Pale shapes among the trees. Standing. Waiting. Mira counted. 10, then 20, then more. They were surrounded. Ellis raised his hand, motioning for stillness. No one moved. Not a breath. The watchers didn't attack. They simply watched. Then, as if obeying a silent command, they began to retreat, fading into the trees like ghosts. Gone. The survivors exhaled. Mira passed Ellis a note. What do they want? Ellis looked into the night and shook his head. He didn't know. The gates of the quiet city loomed in the morning haze, tall, rust-covered, and overgrown with ivy, but intact. Behind them, buildings stood silent and still, untouched by the chaos that had devoured the outside world. The sun broke weakly through the clouded sky, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Ellis stood at the head of the group, staring up at the metal arch where faded letters spelled out, Crestvale, a city for the future. It was almost ironic. The future had come, and it had brought nothing but silence. Juno moved beside him, her hand resting on the handle of her makeshift spear. She passed him a note. "I've scouted it twice." "No," echoed. "No watchers inside. But no people either. It's too quiet." Ellis nodded. In a world where silence was survival, even quiet could feel threatening. Mira joined them, her fingers moving rapidly in sign language. "Are we sure it's safe?" Ellis didn't answer right away. He glanced over his shoulder. Behind him, the other 47 survivors waited, eyes wide with hope and fear. After weeks of travel, ambushes, and watching shadows, this place looked like salvation. But peace often had a price. With a deep breath, Ellis stepped forward and pushed on the gates. They creaked open, loud compared to the hush that had become their normal, but nothing stirred. No rush of movement. No response. The city welcomed them in silence. Rows of buildings lined the wide streets, their windows unbroken, their doors shut but unlocked. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement, but the signs of battle or decay were strangely absent. It was like the people had simply vanished. The group moved cautiously through the first street. Each person kept 3 paces apart to minimize noise. Mira pointed to an old bookstore with an intact sign and smiled slightly. Aaron, the little boy she watched over, tugged her sleeve and pointed at a toy store down the block. She smiled again, softer this time. Even in a world like this, there were still moments that reminded them what they were fighting for. Inside the city, the survivors began to settle in. They split into groups and carefully searched the nearest buildings for supplies. To everyone's surprise, the pantries and storage rooms still held food, preserved cans, sealed packages, and even medicine. It was as if no one had looted Crestvale. Marlowe, the elder of the group, took inventory while others carefully boarded up windows and reinforced doors, not to trap themselves in, but to prepare for whatever might try to get in. Still, something felt off. Juno found it first. A schoolhouse near the park. Everything inside was perfectly arranged, chairs tucked in, books neatly placed, backpacks still hanging. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. She opened a notebook left on a desk. The last written date, March 19th, the day the world had gone silent. Ellis joined her moments later. He read the notebook, then passed it back. They left in a hurry. Or they were taken. Outside, Mira climbed to the top of a clock tower with a small group of scouts. She scanned the city from above and noted something strange. No wildlife. No birds, no squirrels. Not even stray cats. The city wasn't just silent. It was empty in a way that felt unnatural. She raised binoculars and checked the tree-line beyond the city walls. Her blood ran cold. Watchers. Dozens. They stood just beyond the boundary, motionless, their pale forms barely visible through the trees. She quickly descended and found Ellis. "They're out there. Watching. All around the city. But they won't come in." Ellis frowned. "Why not?" No one had an answer. That night, the group gathered in the city's library, the safest structure they'd found so far. Marlowe spoke in hushed tones, a rare moment when words were allowed indoors. "We have shelter. Food. Walls. But something is wrong here. It's too perfect. We didn't find this place, we were led here." Juno looked at Ellis. By who? He didn't know. But the unease wouldn't leave him. Later, while the others slept in shifts, Ellis wandered into an underground maintenance room beneath the city hall. The dust was thick, the lights long dead. But in one corner, he found something strange, a radio, still plugged in, blinking slowly, faint red lights glowing in the dark. It wasn't broadcasting. It was receiving. He turned the dial carefully, keeping it silent. Static. Silence. Then, click. A low hum. Then a voice. Faint. Hollow. Repeating the same words. Remain inside. Do not leave. They cannot enter. Silence is your safety. Ellis froze. The message repeated. It wasn't live. It was a loop. He stared at the radio. Who had set it up? Why was it still powered? And why was the signal still transmitting? He backed away, carefully, the words echoing in his mind. They cannot enter. Silence is your safety. But what if the silence wasn't protection? What if it was a trap? The next morning, the city felt colder. Ellis didn't speak of the radio right away. Instead, he brought Juno and Mira to the underground maintenance room. The radio still blinked, still whispered that same eerie phrase. Remain inside. Do not leave. They cannot enter. Silence is your safety. Juno crouched beside the console. She traced a line of dust with her finger and found a faint logo, Helix Protocol, Contingency Site 7. Mira frowned. Ellis stepped back and said softly, "This was planned. Someone set this city up to be a cage." Mira signed quickly. For who? The Echoed? Us? Before anyone could answer, a soft tapping echoed from above. 3 knocks. Their signal for scouts returning. The trio rushed upstairs. At the library's front entrance, 2 scouts waited, Reese and Tomas, wide-eyed, pale, and covered in ash. Tomas dropped to one knee and scribbled on a slate. Found something west side. Underground facility. Looks recent. Juno's eyes narrowed. Show us. The group followed the scouts across the city, weaving silently past cracked fountains, rusted vehicles, and silent playgrounds. The west side of Crestvale felt different, less overgrown, more intact, as if preserved intentionally. Behind an old electronics store, Tomas pulled aside a false dumpster lid. Beneath it, a reinforced hatch. The metal was cool to the touch. Ellis turned the latch slowly. Inside was a tunnel. Not old. Not abandoned. Fresh wiring ran along the walls. Air flowed from vents. This wasn't pre-collapse infrastructure, it was post-outbreak. They descended into the darkness, flashlights dimmed with cloth to avoid attracting attention. The air grew colder, drier. The tunnel sloped downward, and at its end stood a sealed door marked with numbers, S13. Reese tapped the keypad. Nothing. Juno examined it, then spotted a bypass panel, security grade, but cracked from time. Mira used a multi-tool to pry it open. Sparks flickered. The lock gave way with a quiet hiss. The door opened. Inside, the world changed. The hallway was sterile, bright, and humming with power. Monitors lined the walls. Diagrams. DNA strands. Human figures. Notes and reports scrawled in ink on whiteboards. Ellis moved slowly, reading every word. A heading caught his eye. Phase 4, Audio Suppression and Behavioral Containment. Mira found a small office and unlocked a terminal. The files weren't encrypted. Juno began reading aloud, the first time her voice echoed in days. The Watchers show no aggression toward those who remain silent. Exposure to noise triggers rapid neuroviolence. Crestvale repurposed as Site 7, observation chamber for long-term study. Residents relocated to holding facilities following Phase 3 breach. Silence must be maintained. Loop message programmed. Watchers remain outside boundaries by design. She stopped. No one spoke. The truth settled on them like frost. Crestvale hadn't survived the outbreak. It had been turned into a test site. A lab. And they were the latest test subjects. Ellis clenched his fists. How many cities were like this? Mira typed on a nearby keyboard. A map lit up, red dots scattered across the country. Some marked failed. Others, active. There were 16. Tomas muttered, "We're not the last. Just the latest." Then they heard it. A door deeper in the complex opened, automatically. No footsteps. Just that low, electric hum. The hallway lights flickered. One by one. Then steadied. Mira raised her hand. Silence. They backed out quickly, sealing the hatch behind them. No sound. No talking. Only breathing. Back on the surface, Ellis signaled for a full meeting. All 50 survivors gathered in the city's central square beneath the broken clock tower. This time, Ellis spoke aloud. His voice low, but firm. They built this city as a trap. Not for the echoed. For people like us. Gasps. Fear. Anger. They wanted to observe us. Study how we survive. And the Watchers? They're not here by accident. They're part of it. Reese stood. Then why haven't they come in? Juno answered. Because that's the rule. As long as we stay silent and stay inside, they leave us alone. It's their design. We're in a controlled zone. Mira stepped forward. But that's not survival. That's being kept. Ellis nodded. We didn't come this far to be lab rats. The group stood in silence, but now it was different. Not survival silence. Not fear. Defiance. Ellis looked around. We can stay here, wait, live quietly and hope someone up there pulls the plug, or we take control of our fate. Someone whispered, barely audible, how? He pointed west. There's more beneath this city. Power, data, records. And maybe an answer to what created the Echoed and the Watchers. We learn everything. And we end it. The wind picked up. Distantly, from the trees, the Watchers still stood, unmoving. Waiting. But inside the city, something had changed. For the first time in months, the survivors were planning not just to survive. They were planning to fight back. The city had turned from sanctuary to suspicion. Every alley, every untouched building, now felt like part of a machine, quiet by design, patient by nature. But Ellis had made a decision, the silence could no longer control them. That night, the survivors returned to the underground facility. A small team only, Ellis, Juno, Mira, Tomas, and Reese. If anything went wrong, the others were to stay hidden in Crestvale's central zone. The hatch creaked open. They moved down the same tunnel, but this time, they weren't just observing. They had a goal. Mira held the flashlight tight, its beam narrow and low. Juno brought printed maps taken from the office files. Ellis had committed them to memory. Deep inside Site 7, beneath the second floor, there was something labeled only as Phase 5, Live Trial Observation Room. They passed through the white corridors again. No alarms, no resistance. Power still flowed. Machines still hummed. Somewhere, someone had either forgotten this place, or was still watching. When they reached the stairwell, Mira paused. Her light caught a smear on the wall. Rust red. Old, but clearly not part of the construction. Finger marks dragged along the tiles. Someone tried to get out, she whispered. Juno nodded grimly. And didn't make it. The team descended. At the bottom, another sealed door waited. No keypad this time, just a mechanical lock. Tomas used a crowbar, slow and deliberate, until the metal gave with a muted clunk. The door swung open. What lay beyond wasn't just a lab. It was a theater. Rows of observation chairs lined the back of the chamber. Behind a large glass wall, a room with padded walls and a sealed air system. Inside it, 2 metal chairs, restraints bolted to the floor. A speaker system overhead. And a camera still blinking red in the corner. Juno walked to a console beside the glass. She tapped a key. A video feed began. It showed the same room, months ago. 2 people were inside, a woman and a teenage boy, both bound, both terrified. A voice came through the speaker. Test 312. Emotional provocation. Begin auditory stimulus. The footage crackled. Then a sound, a baby crying, recorded, played over the speaker. The boy screamed, trying to block his ears. The woman wept silently. Within seconds, 2 watchers entered the room. Ellis stepped back. The creatures didn't run. They didn't lunge. They walked, slow and measured. Their eyes didn't blink. They reached the boy first. The screen cut to black. Mira turned away. Juno found the file folder near the console. They weren't just observing. They were testing response triggers. Seeing how the echoed react to human emotion, to sound that comes with feeling. Ellis clenched his fists. This place is evil. Reese found another terminal. Files were open. Data still flowing. He read aloud. Watchers, engineered subtype of echoed. Designed for silent containment. Infiltrate zones. Monitor. React to vocal stressors. Result, 97% human silence compliance within 48 hours. Ellis felt his stomach turn. They didn't create watchers to stop the echoed. They made them to control us. Suddenly, the room lights flickered. A new message popped up on the monitor. Breach detected in Sector 1. Survivor count, 50. Containment protocol activated. Juno froze. They know we're here. Sirens didn't blare. Alarms didn't scream. Instead, the air began to change. A low vibration thrummed through the walls, like a hum just on the edge of hearing. Mira pressed a button. Security cameras across Crestvale appeared. Live footage. Dozens of watchers now stood inside the gates. Motionless, but closer. No longer just observing. They had been waiting for a rule to be broken. And the survivors just had. We have to get out, Ellis said, grabbing the hard drives from the console. Now. They rushed back up the stairs, through the tunnel, into the city above. The night sky greeted them, but not with peace. The watchers were moving. Not running. Not attacking. Just walking. Deliberate. In control. By the time Ellis's team reached the central square, the others were already on alert. Mira signaled to Marlowe, who had taken command in their absence. They're inside, she mouthed. Marlowe nodded. We know. He pointed to the rooftops. Several watchers stood on balconies, watching with those blank, dead eyes. Ellis held up the hard drives. They made these things to cage us. They built Crestvale as an experiment. And now that we broke the rule, they're here to shut it down. A child whimpered in the crowd. A mother quickly covered his mouth, rocking him in silence. They want fear, Juno whispered. They want panic. Emotion. That's what draws them. But no one ran. Not yet. Mira stood beside Ellis. So what now? Ellis looked up at the tallest tower in Crestvale, the old signal tower. A relic with long-range broadcast gear once used for emergency communication. Still standing. Still powered, according to the facility's blueprints. We fight them the only way we can, Ellis said. Juno frowned. With silence? No, Ellis replied, voice firm. With truth. With noise. We expose everything. The watchers. The experiments. The cities. If there are others out there still alive, they need to know. He looked at the survivors, some frightened, some ready. We're done hiding. Let the world hear us. At the break of dawn, Crestvale was no longer quiet. 50 survivors moved with purpose through its streets, their footfalls muffled but no longer fearful. The watchers were inside the walls now, stationed like statues on rooftops, in alleyways, behind windows, observing, waiting. Their glowing eyes never blinked, never turned away. They weren't attacking. Not yet. But everyone in the city knew one thing: the silence had already been broken. Ellis, Mira, and Juno led the others toward the central tower, the old emergency broadcast station perched on Crestvale's highest point. It had once sent out warnings, weather alerts, maybe even final evacuation orders in those first chaotic days. Now, it would carry a different message: the truth. Reese and Tomas had already begun wiring power from the underground facility. The signal tower's equipment sparked to life with a low, electric whine. Dust flew from old speakers. Lights blinked for the first time in years. Mira stood at the base of the tower, studying the surrounding rooftops. "They're not stopping us," she signed. Ellis nodded. "Because they think we'll undo ourselves. That will fall back into fear." Juno looked toward the watchers. "Or maybe, they want us to talk." Inside the tower, old hardware lined the walls, analog dials, broken mics, faded labels. But the broadcasting computer still worked. A miracle, or maybe part of the experiment all along. Ellis placed the hard drives from the lab onto the desk. Juno began uploading the files. Names of the testing sites appeared. Footage. Documents. Blueprints of cities that were never meant to survive. Outside, Mira addressed the crowd. "We've survived ambushes. Starvation. Silence. But this city was a lie. A cage with food and no freedom." Marlowe stepped beside her. "And now we know. We were studied, like mice in a maze." The survivors gathered closer. Even the children were silent, watching the skies, watching the stillness of the watchers. Then Juno's voice came through a loudspeaker for the first time. "Broadcast is ready." Ellis stepped up to the mic. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. But every word cut through the city like a knife. "This is Ellis Wade, survivor of the Crestvale Quarantine Zone, Site 7. If you're hearing this, you need to know the truth." He took a breath, glancing through the glass at the city outside. "We were never alone. We were never safe. Crestvale wasn't untouched by the outbreak. It was engineered to seem untouched. A live experiment in fear and control." He pressed a button. Juno played the lab footage. The screams were muffled, distorted, but real. The sound of the watchers approaching. The message on loop. "Silence is your safety." Ellis continued. "They created the watchers. They placed them here. Not to protect us, but to enforce silence. To make us obedient. To turn survival into submission." Mira stepped up beside him and took the mic. "But we're not test subjects. We're not going to live in fear anymore. We're making noise, and if you're out there, if you've survived, it's time you made noise too." She turned to Juno. "Send it." Juno hit the final command. The files were uploaded. Transmitted. Sent across every remaining emergency frequency. Every repeater tower. Every survivor listening in the dark. A signal of truth. A crack in the silence. Then the city changed. The watchers began to move, not all at once, but deliberately, like they'd been waiting for that very moment. Rooftop by rooftop, street by street, they stepped forward, converging on the tower. Ellis saw them coming. "We knew this would happen." Marlowe gripped a crowbar. Then let it happen on our terms. The survivors took positions. Not with guns, they had few. But with barricades, noisemakers, signal lights, and even mirrors to reflect sunlight and blind the approaching watchers. And above all, voices. One woman began to hum, low and steady. Then another added harmony. Mira tapped a metal rod against a pipe, creating rhythm. Juno whispered a lullaby to a terrified child. And then, the entire square joined. A quiet song filled the air, soft, trembling, but full of defiance. The watchers reached the edge of the square, and paused. Their heads tilted. Uncertain. Something was wrong. The song was not fear. Not panic. It was unity. And the watchers didn't know how to process it. Then came the high-pitched blare of an alarm, one Reese had rigged from the facility's old warning system. The blast pierced the air, a wall of defiance. The watchers faltered. Some stepped back. Juno stared. They're hesitating. Ellis saw his chance. Everyone, get to the western gate. Move now. The survivors broke from the square in organized waves. No screaming. No chaos. Just focused movement. They passed watchers on both sides, frozen, confused, some twitching like broken machines. The broadcast was still running. The signal tower behind them still shone, still spoke. And from the radios carried by scavengers and survivors across the broken world, the message played loud and clear. You are not alone. You were never alone. They built these walls to contain you, but now it's time to break free. The silence of the dead had been broken. Now, the living were ready to rise. Part 8, Final, is ready whenever you are. It will bring the survivors face to face with the final decision: destroy the system and risk drawing the full wrath of the Watchers, or escape into the unknown with the truth echoing behind them. Let me know to continue. Part 8, Echoes of the Living. The gates of Crestvale hadn't been opened in years. Not by the living. Now, they groaned as Tomas and Reese pried them apart with makeshift crowbars and old chains. Each squeal of metal echoed through the silent city like a scream. The Watchers didn't rush to stop them. They watched. From the rooftops. From doorways. From the shadows of towers. The survivors moved with purpose. Their supplies had been packed the night before. Children were bundled in blankets. Elderly helped along on carts. Everyone held something: a flashlight, a pot, a piece of pipe, anything that could make noise, if it came to that. Ellis stood near the front, eyes fixed on the horizon. Beyond the city limits lay the Deadlands, scorched towns, quiet forests, cracked highways. But somewhere past that, maybe hope. Juno adjusted the transmitter pack strapped to her back. Signals still broadcasting. If anyone's listening, they'll hear us. Mira joined them, shotgun slung over her shoulder. We can't go back. They'll never let us rebuild here. Ellis nodded. We're not trying to rebuild the past. We're building something new. Somewhere we speak. Sing. Scream if we have to. Somewhere the undead don't define us. Marlowe walked up, his usual smirk replaced by something solemn. Everyone's ready. You sure we're doing this? No, Ellis said truthfully. But we're not staying. The gate finally gave way. It opened wide enough for two at a time. The world beyond was a pale gray canvas, clouds blanketing the morning light, winds cutting low across broken ground. One by one, the survivors stepped through. They didn't run. They walked. And that, more than anything, seemed to confuse the Watchers. Back at the broadcast tower, the last part of the message played again on loop. We were made silent. But silence was never safety. It was surrender. Now, we choose to be loud. To be free. Suddenly, Mira stopped in her tracks. She turned around slowly. Half a dozen watchers were following, not attacking, not sprinting, just walking. Matching their pace. Ellis followed her gaze. They're studying us again. No, Juno whispered. They're learning. They're adapting. More watchers joined, forming a slow-moving arc in the distance. Silent. Watching. Marching. Panic rippled through the survivors. They're going to trap us outside, someone said. Hurt us like they did before. Ellis raised a hand. No. Keep moving. Don't run. Don't show fear. He turned to Reese. That EMP you rigged, does it still work? Reese hesitated. It's unstable. One-time use. And it'll take out everything, including the broadcast signal. If we don't break their grip now, Ellis said, they'll follow us forever. Reese looked down at the trigger in his hand. A homemade device, wired with scrap tech and stolen parts. He nodded once. Mira stepped close. I'll stay. I'll set it off. No, Ellis said firmly. We go together. Or none of this means anything. The plan was simple: draw the watchers into the square, set off the blast, and destroy their internal guidance, whatever tech or control system they were operating on. They couldn't kill all of them. But they could make them blind. They doubled back. A small team returned to the square: Ellis, Mira, Juno, Tomas, and Reese. By now, the watchers had gathered by the hundreds, lining Crestvale's buildings like gargoyles from another world. The 5 survivors climbed to the top of the signal tower. Juno spoke into the mic one last time. This is our final message. To anyone still listening, silence is no longer the only way to survive. She looked at Reese. He pulled the pin. A surge of blue-white light exploded outward, like a ripple across the surface of sound itself. No fire. No thunder. Just a powerful hum, followed by nothing. The watchers froze mid-step. Then staggered. One by one, their glowing eyes dimmed. Some fell. Others stood still, as if turned off. Statues with no will left to follow. The city grew quiet, but not the kind of quiet that haunted. It was the stillness that follows the storm. The peace that comes not from fear, but from victory. Ellis looked down at the streets below. For the first time, the watchers were gone. Truly gone. Hours later, the survivors stood at the edge of Crestvale, watching as smoke curled from the broken tower. Juno tossed the last piece of the transmitter into a fire. The message had been sent. The world had heard. We're not going back, Mira said, her voice stronger now. We don't need a city to tell us who we are. Ellis smiled at her. We carry the truth with us now. That's all we need. They turned, walked into the wild, and disappeared beyond the trees. Behind them, Crestvale fell silent again, not because the people were afraid, but because the watchers were gone. And finally, the silence belonged to the living. White heavy checkmark. End of story. Let me know if you'd like a cinematic YouTube title card text, AI-generated image prompts for thumbnails, or the full story as a downloadable script for audiobook or video narration.